Hi, I'm Yaakov, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. What does Israel want with the war in Gaza, and where is it going? Last Friday, the Security Cabinet made a decision that seemed to indicate that Israel is expanding the war. But then we're told it's not about the occupation of Gaza, it's about taking control just of Gaza City, and it's not going to happen immediately, but maybe sometime in the next 2 months. In the meantime, Israel is coming under what can only be described as a diplomatic and political tsunami around the world. Countries from Australia to France and Britain and other countries are declaring that they will recognize a Palestinian state. Germany is cutting off weapons, supplies, and shipments to the state of Israel if they are going to be used in the war against Hamas in Gaza. And hostage talks seem to not be going anywhere. President Donald Trump himself said in a phone call to a reporter from Axios this week that he doesn't see a deal happening anytime soon, and that Hamas is not willing to budge. So is Israel going to increase the pressure on Hamas? Is it going to escalate the operation in Gaza? And while Israel is facing a heat wave like nothing ever seen in the history of this country, literally, when I talk about the weather, it's also feeling a heat wave with the tension between the political echelon and the IDF top brass, where Defense Minister Israel Katz is cracking down on IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir and preventing him and denying him the ability to appoint a new round of brigadier generals in the military. So where is Israel going? And what is going to happen in the days and weeks to come? A question, I think, or two questions that we've all been asking ourselves many, many times over the last nearly 2 years since this war began. But we also can't forget that there are lives literally on the line. The pictures and images of Aviatar and Ram, two of the hostages who remain in Gaza in Hamas captivity, malnourished and starving, break our hearts every single time we think about them, all day and every single day. And what is being done, and is enough being done, to bring them home? And can a deal really be made? Those are some of the questions that we're going to deal with on today's episode. I'm joined by two of my JPPI colleagues, two of the smarter people who I know, Gil Troy and Shmuel Rosner, to break down where is Israel headed, where is the war going, and what are the political consequences and ramifications and potential future for Benjamin Netanyahu. Here we go. Shmuel and Gil, it's great to have you both with me. And really, there's so much going on, and it's sometimes it's dizzying, if to say the least. But really, to unpack what is happening and what are we expecting to happen, because it seemed, for example, that the Prime Minister, when they made the decision on Friday, in the build-up to the decision that the Security Cabinet took, first of all, Israel's going to be occupying the entire Gaza Strip. From occupying all of Gaza, the operation turned into an operation just for Gaza City, and from the word of occupation of kovesh, it turned into hishtaltut, to take control, which some people might say is just a game of semantics, but it actually also has some legal significance to it. We'll set that aside for a moment. But then also the Prime Minister said maybe we'll get to this, but it'll take a couple of months. Maybe we'll implement this operation in October. In the meantime, we'll try to start to get people to move out of the Gaza City area. I mean, it makes me wonder, is this classic Netanyahu trying to hold everything together from both sides, keep the right happy that I'm launching an operation, I'm escalating, keep the world or the left happy that I'm still keeping an opening to ending the war and to maybe making a hostage deal, and kind of wait to see what is going to happen, if at all there even is a plan, which we don't really know. I want to get both your opinions on this. So Gil, I'll start with you. Kind of, how do you see what's really happening, and is this operation really something that the world should be concerned, or us Israelis should be concerned that it's going to happen?
Well, as I was listening to your helpful introduction, I was thinking of Donald Rumsfeld's known unknowns. And we keep on having to emphasize that a lot of this is spin, a lot of this is back and forth. But two things I think we can focus on. One, that it seems that Smotrich and Ben Gvir, who are the people who supposedly are holding Netanyahu hostage from the right, are unhappy. Smotrich specifically criticized Netanyahu for not going far enough and holding it back. And on the other hand, the military is also unhappy for going ahead. And that's very significant. I mean, usually it's the military people who are gung-ho and the politicians who have to rein them in. And when you hear stories, and you hear so many of them that you actually have to believe them, of Netanyahu's chief of staff, whom he appointed, Eyal Zamir, saying, we have to be very careful, this isn't really working, it's worrying. And then when you actually go to Netanyahu's press conference, and on Israeli radio yesterday, they were quoting him and then playing back things that he had said, for example, in November 2023, because he said yesterday, he said at his news conference 2 days ago, that this is the first time we're going into Gaza City. And then they heard him on November 23rd saying, we're going into Gaza City. And so you start saying how much of this is, I mean, we talk about fog of war, but I think we also talk about the fog of Bibi.
You know, as you're selling that, I'm reminded of another video I saw. I can't remember who put it out, but Netanyahu said at his press conference on Sunday evening that I have to admit, we have yet to achieve victory. And this is after he had said that we're a step away from victory, right? We're on the doorstep of victory. And he repeated this this is how we're going to get to victory. He had said this a year ago and a year and a half ago. And famously last April 24, not April 25, April 2024, he said we are we're a step away from victory. And now he's admitting that we're not yet at the victory. I mean, so Shmuel, with all that as the context, what is Netanyahu really planning? Is there really a plan here, like I asked, or is this just buy time with this coalition, buy time with Hamas, buy time with Donald Trump? What's he thinking?
Well, assuming there is a plan, the plan would be as follows. I'm going to climb a tree, and I'll climb as high as possible in the hope that someone is going to hand me a ladder so I can climb down. That's the only plan I can see now. Netanyahu found himself in a very uneasy situation. It is necessary to say that Israel is facing a very difficult dilemma here, and just blaming him for the situation will not be helpful, even if it's his fault that we found ourselves at this situation. And the situation is that Israel cannot convince Hamas to go for a deal, for an acceptable deal. What Hamas demands now is the sky, and most Israelis would not accept the terms that Hamas want to dictate for a possible deal. The other option is to escalate. An escalation, as you said, we were promised a victory just around the corner time and again in the past year and a half. It didn't happen. We have an exhausted military. We have people who served in the last 2 years 200 days, 300 days, 400 days. I'm talking about civilians being calling to serve in reserve duty for hundreds of days, calling them back now as the government is in parallel trying to release all the ultra-Orthodox draftees from mandatory service. That's a situation that is very tricky for the government to handle. So I think what Netanyahu is trying to do is say, look, I'm now trapping myself with this, I'm going to commit myself to escalation, and then the rest of the world is going to understand that either they find some kind of solution, namely they find a way to convince Hamas to accept a reasonable deal, or I will have to escalate because there's no other choice for me. I don't think he wants to escalate. I don't think escalation is a well-planned thing, well-planned path that the government can see. The military is clearly not enthusiastic about it, and for the government to achieve its goal without the cooperation, the full cooperation and commitment of the military is going to be very difficult. So again, we are buying time, and we are trying to signal that unless something is going to happen, Israel will have no choice but to do something that is going to be harmful for everybody.
And by the way, I mean, it has to be said that 100% Israel is in a very difficult situation. We can't just blame Netanyahu. At the end of the day, you do need Hamas to play ball and to agree to a deal and to be willing to release the hostages. What raises the suspicion always against Netanyahu is the back and forth, is the ping pong, right? Is there was a deal, then there wasn't a deal, that he wanted a partial deal with a ceasefire, and then more negotiations. Now he wants a complete deal that releases all the hostages. It's that constant jumping from one side to the other, and always making it appear as if it has some sort of political context to it that I think does raise the suspicion, definitely of the hostage forum, the families, but also I think of the wider public. But when it comes also to the military, and your point of getting the military on board, right? He made very clear in that press conference, he was asked about, do you support Eyal Zamir, the IDF chief of staff that you yourself, as Gil pointed out, appointed, said, by the way, it's not that Netanyahu appointed him. Netanyahu said he tried to appoint him twice before and was not able to push through the appointment. And now finally he was able to do it. In other words, this was the guy that he wanted. And now suddenly he's not going through with the plan that Eyal Zamir wanted. There's clear tension.
Let me say something, I'll make a blunt comment here. This is, in Israel's history, there's never been a government who had such bad relations with the military. It's the worst relation we've seen in Israel's history between the high echelon of the IDF and the government, and that's really troubling.
And just today, they couldn't push through an appointment, a series of appointments that the chief of staff, the General Zamir, wanted to push through because Israel Katz, the defense minister, said they hadn't coordinated because apparently they haven't had a meeting in weeks and weeks.
No, there is a constant attempt. We saw this with Herzi Halevi, who was the chief of staff before Eyal Zamir, a constant attempt to belittle or to make smaller the IDF chief of staff. We thought with Herzi Halevi, at least I thought, that this was because he was the chief of staff on October 7th, which made him for an easier target. And therefore, the government could try to deflect from its own culpability or responsibility and put that on Herzi Halevi. But to see that continue now with Eyal Zamir tells you, I think, what Shmuel is referring to. This is something far greater. It's intentional. It is, they are looking always for.
It's constant. It's deliberate. Yeah. It's the methodology of this government to belittle the IDF, to make it a scapegoat, and to try and claim all the credit for successes and put all the blame for failures. Which is
exactly that's what I was saying. Netanyahu did at his press conference where he says, I killed Nasrallah, they didn't want me to. We attacked Iran, they didn't want me to. We had, it's always the IDF didn't want, and okay, that history will judge, right? But the other piece of this, Gil, that we can't ignore, right, is we have our internal problems. They're not going away. But the world is crashing down on us, right? The term, the diplomatic tsunami, I think it was Ehud Barak, by the way, I was trying to think about this the other day, who warned for the first time, used that phrase, the diplomatic tsunami, back in the day. I think that it's finally come, and it's hitting hard. We woke up this morning to the news that Australia now is going to be recognizing a Palestinian state. We of course have Europe. We had the news this week by the German chancellor that they are suspending any weapons shipments or deliveries to Israel, with a caveat that would be used in the Gaza Strip. Okay, what exactly does that mean? But clear tension with our greatest ally in Europe. I mean, Britain, France, forget about those guys already. Israel is facing a big problem. We do have one friend in the world, and he remains our friend for now, and his name is Donald Trump. But I'll tell you my theory and tell me what you think for a moment. Donald Trump is supposed to be meeting on Friday in Alaska with Vladimir Putin. Trump made peace with Azerbaijan and Armenia over the weekend. He had made peace previously with Thailand, Cambodia, I think Rwanda, Congo. Right, this is the president of peace. If the Russia-Ukraine war starts to move into a track of negotiations and peace and seems to be nearing an end, there's one conflict left for Donald Trump, and that becomes ours. And I think we might become a little more annoying to Donald Trump if that seems to be the case, which might be why, for example, Netanyahu is trying to buy some time also with Donald Trump. So I'm curious, when you look at the global dynamic and you look at Donald Trump and where he's been so far, how do you see it all coming together?
I'll see you and raise you that Donald Trump also lives in a world of winners and losers. And after October 7th, he famously dismissed Netanyahu and Israel as losers and then kind of called it back. We saw during the Iran war that he was incredibly careful at the very beginning. And it was only after the amazing 12 hours that we had at the start and the Fox News cheerleading that he said, okay, this is going to work. But it was very clear that if Israel had failed in Iran, he would have distanced himself from Israel. And so the diplomatic tsunami is problematic because it risks making Israel look like a loser. And I want to say two other things about this diplomatic tsunami. One is that once again, I'm struck by the degree to which what people do often leads them to the opposite conclusion. The more people attack Israel, the more they call for a Palestinian state, the more they undermine Israel and Bibi, the more Hamas is emboldened. The less likely it is to get hostages home, the less likely it is to get a ceasefire, the less likely it is for Stephen Witkoff or anybody else to put pressure on Hamas and be effective. And so the degree to which people are undermining themselves and diplomats are undermining themselves is disturbing. The degree to which the Palestinian state now becomes not a gift to Hamas or the Palestinian Authority, because nobody really takes the calls of, oh, make sure that the Palestinian Authority is free of corruption and Hamas leaves Gaza seriously. And so it just becomes a way of bashing Israel. And the second thing I want to emphasize is that American Jews, British Jews, Australian Jews have to watch their words. Not because I'm forcing them to as an Israeli. I'm asking them to as a partner, as a friend. Because when they sign petitions, when they echo the critique, not only does it embolden Hamas and weaken Israel, but it shows a lack of humility, a lack of what Shmuel was talking about before, about an appreciation of the complexity, and a lack of solidarity. And at this particular moment, we need our friends and we need our allies to kind of say, A, as Shmuel said, this is really complicated. This is very, very confusing. And B, the funny thing is, let's go back to that word victory that we're throwing around. If on October 7th, I had said, we want to make sure that my cousin Adele and everybody who lives on the Gaza corridor is able to go back and live in safety. And we want to make sure that Hamas is degraded. We would say, those are valid war aims, and we've achieved them. And in fact, those are the war aims that we achieved in Lebanon with Hezbollah. We haven't eliminated Hezbollah. We haven't crushed them entirely. And so we've actually had certain victories along the way, and we have improved the situation. Now, of course, there also is the hostage problem. But one of the problems that we've had since October 7th is the government itself overpromising. And so we're seeing this kind of perfect storm of the diplomatic problems and the internal political problems of Israel meeting one another and reinforcing one another.
Shmuel, how much does Netanyahu, where he is in his state of mind at the moment, how much does the so-called diplomatic tsunami trouble him? Like, he sees Keir Starmer with his comments, Macron with his, now the Chancellor of Germany, Australia, whatever it might be. Is he troubled, or does he not care anymore? Is he beholden too much to the far right in the coalition? Are all the cards from his perspective in the White House, and therefore nothing else really matters? And from his perspective, the war will end and everything will just go back maybe to the way it once was, with London, with Paris, with Berlin, etc. I mean, where do you see that?
Well, he's obviously troubled by what he sees around the world, but his current approach is to try and push back, rely on the support of Donald Trump. The most important supporter of Israel currently is Donald Trump, and as long as the United States has Israel's back, Netanyahu has some leverage. So he's pushing back with some good reason. I agree with Gil. The fact that dozens of countries are going to recognize a non-existing Palestinian state or do some other foolish things, that's on them, but it doesn't help us to say that their policies make no sense. I don't think the Australian policy makes sense, but it doesn't much help me to say this. I'm still surrounded by countries that criticize Israel constantly, make life more difficult and more troubling for Israelis who travel abroad, make life more difficult for Israeli institutions such as research universities, different commercial enterprises, etc. That's not a healthy situation for a country to be it. I think Netanyahu probably says to himself, well, when the war is over, this will go back to normality. But some things could linger, and that's the troubling thing. The image of Israel as a country that is constantly blamed for doing inhumane things in Gaza, whether right or wrong, that's an image that could stick. And if it sticks, this could mean trouble for Israel, not just for the next weeks or month. It could mean trouble for Israel for the coming years. Israel does not want to be a pariah state in the world. And even though we have a very good reason to fight in Gaza and to try to defeat Hamas and even to eliminate Hamas, we need to make sure that the damage to Israel doesn't make the current military enterprise more costly than beneficial to our interests.
But the one thing I'll just push back on that is that I look at talking to just Israeli people, right? And I think that a lot of them have bought into this idea that no matter what we do, the world is against us. They look at the starvation campaign that was led by Hamas, the way that the New York Times, as well as other newspapers around the world, put on their front pages photos of Palestinian children, yes, suffering, and yes, in crisis, but not because of the starvation, not because of hunger, because of other issues. Yes, there is a crisis in Gaza. I'm the first to I think we all should recognize that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but it's not the way that it's being portrayed in the world. And I think that Israelis, they see what happened in Greece the other day when some Syrian refugee bit the ear of an Israeli, and an Israeli couple was attacked in Venice. I read a pregnant woman and a man, and I mean, there's all these stories all over the place of people who are feeling insecure, Israelis traveling around the world. I'm sure we all have friends and family who we know that this is happening to, and I know a family that saying to their kids, wherever we are in Europe, we don't talk in Hebrew, and if somebody says Hebrew and someone asks where you're from, we're from America, or tell them we're speaking Portuguese and not Hebrew. But the Israeli people, to me, seem like they'll buy into the Bibi narrative that I'm standing up, I'm pushing back, and the world is always going to be against us. I mean, Gil, do you think that there's a way to change that?
Well, first, we have to live with two realities. One is absolutely true. Part of the problem is that Israel's defending itself. When Jews defend themselves, all of a sudden, people who were quiet about the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war, people who have allowed democratic armies to do all kinds of things without protesting, all of a sudden start protesting. And yes, there also is, talk about a diplomatic tsunami, there is a Jew-hating tsunami out there where somehow the wolves have been let loose again. And anti-Semitism, which never disappeared, but which was marginalized and not legitimate, is now being mainstreamed, not just on campuses, but on streets. That is happening. But our government and the Israeli people also have to live with the fact that there are many, many friends of ours, many, many people who don't hate what Israel is, but are very troubled by what Israel does, who are also now speaking up. Just today in The Atlantic, there's a piece by Bono, the great Irish singer, who talks about how predatory and depraved Hamas was on October 7th, who talks about how upset and how much he personally took the attack on Nova Festival because he was performing in Las Vegas, and he spoke very powerfully about that. But nevertheless, he also says, at what point is it enough? And he's very careful not to attack the Israeli people, not to attack Israeli Jews, but he says that the government is the problem, and that this fundamentalist government is, and he makes what I find an unfortunate parallel between, he says, Israel and the Israelis and Palestinians are both being held hostage by fundamentalist leaders.
The Italian defense minister made a similar comment.
So I wouldn't go that far, but you read his article and you can't just say, oh, he's an anti-Semite, oh, he hates us, because I quoted him in my essential guide on October 7th about how he stood up with us. And so, and yes, there is exaggeration, and yes, it is a problem when people throw around words like mass starvation and genocide, and it's not appropriate. But we also have to deal with the fact that, as you said, there is a humanitarian crisis. And will things change? Look, on one level, until this war is over, given how far we've gone, things won't change. And we're going to have to sit with the fact that, look, we've done an amazing job in fighting back jihadism on many fronts. We've done a great service to the world. Our kids have done a great service to the world in pinning back Iran's nuclear hopes. But nevertheless, the world isn't going to say thank you. I'm okay with that. But I do think that the surge of hatred, which will linger for a long time, will be more manageable once we have an end. Now, that doesn't mean that we should rush to an end if we have actually a way of saving more hostages and a way of truly, truly degrading Hamas. And look, as a historian, I'll put in, and I've said this before on the broadcast, that the Civil War, for the last year and a half of the Civil War, World War II, the last year and a half of World War II, there were constant debates. We've had enough. It's over. But no. U.S. Grant, unconditional surrender. Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, unconditional surrender. So when you finish a war is a very difficult issue. Judging a war in real time is very problematic. And that's why I simply ask our friends, you want to criticize? Fine. You want to have a great idea? Even better. But also a little proportion, a little...
But I think we've learned that what other countries are allowed to do, Israel, the Jewish people are not allowed to do. Shmuel, I want to move to the...
That's a fact of life, though, that the Israeli government must factor in as it reaches its decisions. Let's say the world is unfair, the world is anti-Semitic, the world is hostile to Israel. Okay, so we know that. Now let's factor it in. We cannot just ignore the problem and say, well, the hell with the world. We are part of the world.
It seems like that's what this government has been doing.
Israel does not want to become a North Korean regime. We would like to be a Western country connected to the world, enjoying the benefits of being connected to the world. And we have to understand this reality and take it, when we consider our next moves, to take it into consideration.
That's a great thought. But if you ask Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Aryeh Deri, I think that, of course we want to be part of the OECD and we want to have ties with the world, but they also want to turn us into a theocratic and far right and let me say fascist country.
You know what these three ministers you mentioned share? All three don't speak English. All three are ministers of parties, and some of them of people whose connection to the rest of the world is much diminished by their lack of proper education. I don't think most Israelis are there. I don't think Israel is there. I think the Israeli public wishes to remain a part of the Western world. And again, with all the caveats and their complaints and the things that we can say about the hypocrisy of the world and the tendency to blame Jews for all ills in the world and the tendency to see Israel in darker light than other countries. I accept all that, and what I think about the rest of the world is similar to what many Israelis do. The only thing I don't accept is that by blaming others, we can release ourselves from our responsibility to remedy the situation. That's the essence of Zionism, to take responsibility for our own fate. Blaming others doesn't help us.
Except that we do have Jewish genes, and we just kvetching and blaming others is always going to be the instinctive thing to do. But I totally agree with you. It's an interesting insight, what you say about Deri, Smotrich, and Ben-Gvir. I think what they also have in common is they do have a very different vision for what they want to see here in the state of Israel than the vast majority of the people. And I want to take us back for a moment to where we began with Netanyahu trying to make a decision that he thought would appease the right. It did not. And we heard that Smotrich said, and this guy Smotrich, it's hard to believe a word the guy says because, he's upset with the government, but then he says he's staying in the government, and this isn't the first time he's upset with the government. And Ben-Gvir, you don't even hear much from him. I heard him on the radio the other day actually taking credit for this new operation in Gaza. So unclear exactly where this guy is. But Netanyahu's right-wing flank is not happy. The Haredim are outside of the government, although Deri is somehow still in the security cabinet. Would love for someone to explain that one to me one day. But what, politically speaking, Netanyahu now has until the end of October for till the Knesset resumes, comes back to session, and then they could potentially try to pass a bill to disperse the Knesset, or it could just keep on going. And it seems to me that more likely at the time being, this coalition's going to last. I mean, nobody's got really anywhere to go. There's no urgency. Why would it fall apart? I mean, is your let me get both of your analyses here. Gil, start with you, and then Shmuel. Do you see that Netanyahu's in hot water politically, or does it kind of seem like he's running in calm waters?
I don't think he's been in calm waters for a long, long time. And this has been, we all know one of the more disruptive governments in Israeli history. And regardless of whether or not the government falls, the election clock is already ticking, because it basically has a year and a half left in its mandate. And if it lasts, it'll actually be a miracle, because I don't think any Israeli government has ever been able to play out its entire time. So, but yeah, he had an unstable coalition from the moment he started negotiating with them and gave in too much to Ben Gvir's demands during the 30 days of putting the coalition together back in November 2021, 2022. The important thing I think we have to think about is how to go forward. And again, I think it's important because there's the narrative of despair and the narrative of defeat and the narrative of we can't, which I acknowledge we're facing some serious issues, doesn't help us go forward. And it's important to note the victories we've racked up. It's important to note how effective Tzahal has been after a horrific start to the war. It's important to note that Netanyahu has also been right on many things, defying Biden repeatedly, pushing for even sometimes with the military. I don't buy his narrative. It's only been him, but and sometimes against the military to make things happen. So the challenge here is, how do you have a prime minister who is constantly juggling politically, also stop, take a breath, and start thinking diplomatically, and start thinking as a statesman? And that's been my ongoing critique, that we need to hear more Winston Churchill and less political boss. And and somebody who's already, in his mid-70s, who's run the country for so long, needs to start thinking about really, how does he want to shape a legacy, not just stay in power.
And shape a legacy, I would hope something that's beyond just security, and also talks about the internal issues that Israel still faces, which are, in my opinion, no less existential, and maybe even more.
Right. And unites the people.
Than what? Yeah, and right now this guy cannot unite the people. Shmuel, what's your take?
Well, the coalition is fairly stable because, as you said, they have nowhere to go. The polls aren't giving them any hope of repeating the same coalition again, at least not for now. I think they are all just buying time. It's summertime now. Until October, until the end of October, they have nothing to worry about, and maybe by then something is going to emerge. Some external threat, some unexpected success. Who knows what's going to happen until October? They're just buying time in the hope that something good can materialize before they must go to new election. There are many, as you said, there are many balls in the air right now, and predicting what's going to be the exact moment in which the government crumbles is going to depend on the very specific interests of very specific parties. It could be the ultra-Orthodox if they decide that it's a good time for them not to return because of the draft law, or it could be Smotrich if he decides that the operation in Gaza is not going well and it's time for him to declare himself as the true leader of the true right wing of Israel's society. At some point, someone is going to say, that's the right time for me, and this will be the time in which the coalition crumbles.
I have to say, personally, I look forward to that day.
Most Israelis do, but that's been true for the last year and a half.
Since I mean, personally, before October 7th, definitely after October 7th.
This is, in the true sense, this has been a minority government since long time before the war. it does not have the support of the majority of the people since before the war, and it never recovered the support of the majority of the people. So they have the majority in the Knesset. They don't have the majority among Israelis, and that's why they make such effort to stay in power, because if they lose power, they might not return.
Yeah. Okay. Gil Troy, Shmuel Rosner, my colleagues from JPPI, thank you so much for joining us. And to all our listeners and viewers, thank you for being with us again on another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast. You can find us here, as always, every week on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website of Times of Israel. And we'll be back soon with another episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks.